Right, I'm sure both our viewers, Pat, are today feeling that all our birthdays have come in the 1 week because
Yeah.
we were here
How
on
lucky
Monday,
can they
we were
get?
here last
Yeah.
night, and we're here again today.
Yeah.
They
God
must be
bless
so
them.
happy. What else would
And,
they be?
and if you're watching us for the third time this week, you're a very sad
No,
person.
no, they weren't just watching us last night. They should be looking at Chris Donnelly because he's a man who knows a few things. So we'll come back to him maybe at a later point. But just in terms of, we'll get the thing started. It's a very local sort of event, given that everybody's looking towards the Ukraine. But in the front of that venerable organ, the Irish News, which I read for free in my local shopping centre this morning, there was an article about Naomi Long has called on, said Brandon Lewis should clarify what are the conditions that would be necessary for a border poll. And it's essentially, she was saying, it's no good keeping it as vague as when he decides that, the conditions. Yeah. Well, what are these conditions? The Northern Ireland office answered the question, which was directed at Brandon Lewis. They answered it. And they said, the conditions do not exist here. Most people want to remain part of the UK, so there's no need for a border poll at this time. What do you think of that, Pat?
I think that's unbelievably arrogant, but Jude, let's...
you would have used other words if it hadn't been on air.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got accused by certain people of using industrial style language, but hey, let's get this clear, Jude. By the way, I can never remember what date in May is the assembly elections.
Well, I think it's the 5th. I'm not sure.
I think it's the 5th too. Yeah, it's definitely not there. Right, here's
the thing. Early May.
See, come the 5th of May. We'll say it's the 5th of May. Sinn Féin become the largest party by some distance on the assembly.
Yes.
And the all raison d'etre of Sinn Féin, or its main plank anyway, it has been for years, the unification of this island. Now, if in the event that they turn up as the main players at the assembly, Brandon Lewis can't turn around and say, because if I'm voting for Sinn Féin, I know what I'm voting for. I am voting, one of their main planks, as I've said earlier, is the unification of Ireland. So therefore, he is not in a position, nor has any other British politician, to turn around and say, oh, by the way, a vote for Sinn Féin does not mean a vote for the whole concept of doing a unity poll. It most certainly does.
Well, I think you've got a point there, Pat. It's a good point too. But don't forget that if they were, let's say Sinn Féin got the most votes, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that the majority of people here want a united Ireland.
No, I didn't say that.
Of people, it wasn't 100% of people who went to the polls. It might only have been 40, 50% at the most.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but hold on. How are you supposed to judge these things? If a majority, if the biggest party is returned to after as Sinn Féin, that is a sizable cohort of people who know what they're voting for, and it's voting for at least the concept of having a united Ireland, or at least a poll to discuss having a united Ireland. So, Jude, I think the days of sort of dismissing it, there's no need for it, and going to run away off and nothing to see here from Brandon Lewis. Those days would be over.
I think you're right. I think that's the strongest indicator we would have would be, say, if Sinn Féin, as you say, was to get the most votes. That would suggest that most people here in the north want a united Ireland. Now, Brandon Lewis and company would say, oh, not at all those people that didn't vote, we can't tell what they obviously want to remain in the United Kingdom. Well, that's rubbish. He doesn't know what the rest of them think, and neither do we. So the question you would ask him is, what are the criteria you're using for saying that all these...
I'll ask you a question. Why do you think Naomi Long has stuck her oar in on this whole thing? Surely it's not natural territory for Alliance Party.
Come on, Pat. You're a laugh. You're a laugh. You know perfectly well. You know perfectly well why she said it. That's the thing that gets me about the Alliance Party. One of the things is they don't have any position on the constitutional question, and they wear that as a badge of honor. I think that's rubbish. I really do think that's rubbish. There's the topic that has tormented Ireland for the last 100 years at least, and maybe 800 years, is the question of Irish independence. The reason she's made this statement now is she will look like someone who is interested in and concerned for and open to the idea of a border poll, which means second preferences maybe coming in the election in May, coming from the SDLP, coming from Sinn Féin, and that's nice. She's just, and if anybody says, "Oh, you're in favor of United Ireland," she can always say, "Oh, well, I'm just want to clarify things." What do you think of that? Am I a big cynic?
No, I agree with you totally. But by the way, you were saying earlier, I just cross them over and you can nod them in. No, I agree with you totally. That's exactly what it's about. Of course it is. The Alliance Party I've met over the years, no, I haven't met a lot of them, but I remember being at a function one time and sat beside two Alliance people, and like they were most definitely unionists with a small U, and maybe even in one case, maybe even a capital U. And there was no question. It was basically we're unionists, but we want to live here in peace, and we want to reach out to our nationalist brothers. But we wanted to stay British. There was no question of. No, but Jude, maybe you mentioned Chris Donnelly, Chris, the psephologist. Chris is a guy who's got his finger on the pulse in regard to. And I'd forgotten, and he said last night. Remember he mentioned Anna Lowe. Remember she about 4 or 5 years ago. She said, and was she the mayor of Belfast at the time? Can't remember. Anyway, so. She was the candidate, and we selected for was it South Down or something? And she said she was in favour of United Ireland, and the roof fell in.
Well, absolutely. She used the word. If you remember, she used the word colony.
Yeah. Well, the roof absolutely fell in on her, and the Alliance Party had to come off the fence there and said it was not party policy, United Ireland, and all the rest of it. So I think that exposed the fact that they're not really that much in favour of Irish unity.
I agree completely. The Alliance Party are off the school of thought, which says what we really need to solve our problems here is to be nice to each other. No.
Yeah, which by the way is fair enough. It
is, but it doesn't. What would you say? It doesn't butter any parsnips.
I was immediately going to use that phrase.
The second question is, you just can't ignore the fact that this is a country that is partitioned, and I'm certain the majority of Irish people believe it is wrongly partitioned, and the question is, what do you do about it? But they don't deal with that. They say, "Oh no, we'll deal with other things. We'll deal with being nice to people." I think that really annoys me. People who say, and the same thing with people before profit, by the way. They would say, "We're concerned with bread and butter issues." Great stuff. I'm delighted you are. Now, tell me, what's your position on the constitutional question? Because I think somebody said, I don't know where I saw this now, but somebody said there was talk about Russia invading a neighbor.
Yeah.
A neighboring country that wasn't in NATO. And could you not say the same thing about Britain and Ireland? Why are you laughing? See, I think we've been conditioned to laugh at that, And I sort of...
The reason I'm laughing is there's so much hypocrisy, double standards. Jude, maybe we should move on with maybe that point. But I listened to this thing about Putin getting slammed for saying the Ukrainians are using their civilians as shields against Russian weapons. And I was going, where have I heard that before? And I went, Israel, when they were doing the Palestinians. And everybody,
they used it here, for God's sake, Pat.
Yeah, whenever you but hold on, I'm talking about. Everyone, bar none, I heard this morning on Sky and others saying this was a ridiculous thing for him to come out and say the Russians are the one doing the attacking, it's Russian missiles, etc., and they're hitting civilian targets. What the hell do you think the Ukrainians are supposed to do? Which I agree with totally. But I remember when the people said about Israel doing it, what do you call it? A lot of the British politicians were poo-pooed it and said, what do you call it? Hamas are putting the things, and they're putting their own people in danger, etc. And I thought to myself, well, so victim blaming is all right in one scenario, but not in the other.
But
the hypocrisy is unbelievable.
Don't you remember the civil rights? And there'd be riots. And I remember reading English papers reporting and saying that the IRA was using these crowds, these young people, vulnerable young people, as cover so they could fire on the British Army.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same charge. But tell me, before we leave this, I'm going to take, say, 30 seconds at it. am I being ridiculous? Am I being laughable when I say that there's a parallel between Russia invading a neighbor that's not in NATO and that Britain has invaded Ireland and Ireland's not NATO?
Yeah, Jude.
Is that ridiculous?
No, it's not ridiculous. It's just, as for years, Jude, we've been, as you said earlier on, and I think because we've had 800 years of it, it doesn't change the dynamics of it, or the, even the ethics of it. Like, they're still part of this country, divided against the will of the people.
That's exactly.
And if you're not allowed to vote one way or the other, there's also a big question about the legitimacy of that. And Jude, it was set up in an artificial way based on a sectarian religious headcount.
Absolutely.
So I could keep going. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean I'm denying unionists their rights or their civil rights or anything, but let's get the facts out there.
Good. Okay, let's move to Stephen Collins, who isn't very keen on Sinn Féin, and he has an article in today's Irish Times. Do you want to talk about that for a minute, Pat?
Yeah, I read it this morning, Jude, and I was thinking there'll be a whole lot of people say, like they said, Sinn Féin is now on the bandwagon and wanting the Russian ambassador to be removed from Ireland and so on and so on. And they said, wasn't that long ago Sinn Féin were actually sort of soft on Putin when Leo Varadkar expelled the Russian guy after the two Russians were poisoned in Britain and so on, that Mary Lou McDonald had sort of chastised him, saying, "Where's our neutrality?" and all this sort of stuff. And he went back, But Judah was halfway through it and I thought, no, let's be honest. I think a lot of people that want to be convinced are going to be convinced by the argument. But I was halfway when I was reading that article. They said somewhere about 2015 about someone about whatever it was. Can't remember, Jude. I don't really care. He was really struggling to find these sort of things to, slam Sinn Féin. I thought to myself, wait a minute, there's so many things in the past. Basically, Mary Lou McDonald was saying that she didn't understand about Putin, why the Irish government was always having a bash at Russia. She thought she'd be encouraging better relationships back in 2015, which, by the way, a lot of other people were saying the exact same thing, and so on. Back then, things changed. Putin didn't invade Ukraine back in 2012 or whatever it was. He's gone back a whole lot of years. So I thought it was, it's almost like picking out something and out of context and throwing it out and saying, "Oh, this proves my case." No, it doesn't.
Absolutely. Well, you see, poor old Stephen is on a mission to get after Sinn Féin, himself and Michael McDowell, and they continually look for things. And they can go from Ukraine to the Sinn Féiners with no bother. They do that leap. I mean, Michael McDowell did it the other day. But the thing is this, to me, a couple of points. One, it sounds a wee bit like the Skibbereen Eagle. They say now that Sinn Féin's leaping on the bandwagon and wants to get rid of the Russian ambassador. I think I answered this to you, and I think it's a wee bit Skibbereen Eagle-ish. It's overestimating what your power is. But, some people might want to dismiss him or expel him. Some mightn't. Personally, I don't think it matters. I think what does matter is, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the invasion of Ukraine? Are we talking about Putin, who is mad or bad or both? Right? Yeah. Or are we talking about essentially two big world powers, Russia and NATO?
Yeah.
Who are competing for, Russia would see themselves as making themselves safe. NATO would see them as being an aggressive force. Now, I'm sure that history, if it's properly written, will say it's that, and not that suddenly this guy Putin just went mad. And I've heard them saying, would you trust his sanity? Is he right in the head? Yeah. If he wasn't right in the head, he wouldn't have succeeded in becoming top dog in Russia. Yeah. So all I'm saying is there is a bigger case here where two big powers are clashing. And I think Sinn Féin were right to point that out. And we shouldn't be suckered into nonsense where people say, like Stephen Collins say, "Oh, we've got to stand for democracy. It doesn't matter whether you're neutral or not. You're not neutral in terms of democracy versus fascism."
Jude, I heard a woman, I think I mentioned before, I think she was involved with some Kirov ballet or something in Moscow, and She was on RT, but the reason I remembered, I was walking around. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sun was shining. I was listening there on my earphones, and she was saying they were talking about Russia and one of them current affair programs on a Saturday afternoon. And anyways, basically what she said was when Yeltsin was there, it was absolute chaos. She had been a member of the Kirov Ballet Company, and she says some days she got paid, some days she didn't. Some days the buses ran on time, some days they didn't. Sometimes the trains. Everything was chaos. Civil servants didn't get paid. And along comes Putin, and she said within a very short space of time, she said suddenly everybody got paid on time. The buses ran on time, and all the rest of it. And she said, and so on. And she says, I remember her clearly saying, for all his faults, he has to be admired for sort of. I'd needed a strong man to clear all that up and what was going on and so on and make it work, make it efficient. She was on there quite recently, and she's most definitely changed her tune, saying that this is a disaster and all the rest of it for Russia and going on. Right, Jude, she has changed her mind. Are they saying Mary Lou McDonald and people who, years ago, were making the same points as she was back then, that Russia's like he's trying to shape the place up and so on, and the West should be reaching out and trying to reach an accommodation? Was that wrong then?
Well, if you stop to think about it, Stephen Collins was criticising Sinn Féin and Mary Lou because they'd sort of been pro-Russia. Now he's criticising her because she's called for the ambassador to be expelled.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like no one there.
But Jude, let's be honest. A lot of these people, they look at Trump and people like that in America for years. Those last couple of years have been very pro-Russia as well. Like and like that's the whole right wing.
Yeah. So, but you wouldn't have the same criticism of that because they don't belong.
No, you wouldn't have the same criticism of that.
But anyway, you asked the question, Pat. Was sanctions the best thing we could come up with to these guys who are shelling Russia, who are shelling civilians? And is this not really weak on our part or in the part of NATO? Should we not be standing up to them? Well, what's your answer to that, Pat?
Jude, I heard a guy on yesterday. He was I can't remember exactly what he was. He said, "Look, oh Jesus, wait a minute. I think it might have been John Bolton, the American hawk." But it was on RT yesterday. But he didn't make one good point. He said, like Russia, I know it's nearly a fait accompli, and what the West can do now is very limited. But he says one thing they could do is sort of say to the Russians, right, you're in the east of the country, we're not going to get involved in that, but you have no troops in the west, the west of the country, and we're going in to impose a no-fly zone here to have a sort of humanitarian corridor, and we're not looking to have a fight with you, but we're creating this corridor, and so on. And your man, I think Colin O'Hara asked him, but is that just not leaving the eastern part to Russia? He says, yeah, but that's the reality of it. The Russians are already there, and he says basically they're not part of NATO, and you'd hope that the Ukrainians would be able to keep it going. But anyway, let me move on to. I heard someone. There's a wee child on today. She said they were hitting schools, they were hitting hospitals, they were hitting residential areas. So the Russians have got pretty heavy duty arms going into residential areas. And so it looks like civilian crimes are being, or crimes against civilians. I know. So Jude,
so what do we do?
I do think it's time. And Jude, the other thing as well, last night, the Russians, and it is the Russians, they're trying now to say it was sabotage around that nuclear thing. Do you seriously saying Ukrainians are going to blow up their own nuclear reactor and it's their own people going to get it first? Not at all. That's rubbish. So I think that we nearly need to sort of say, right, wait a minute, even if he is threatening World War III, that hey, you can't just keep letting them threaten and keep getting away with it. When do you stop?
Well, I tell you, Pat, I would want to. Since they've put their money on sanctions, I would want sanctions to be explored thoroughly. I mean, so the reason they're holding back is because they're afraid that if they went all out ultimately might mean nuclear weapons. And I mean, if that happens, we're all finished. We've had it.
Yeah.
We have had it.
And exactly, and I agree with you totally. But is that how weak the West is? All he has to do is threaten every time, and he gets what he wants.
Well, what they're doing now is trying to put in place sanctions. Now, some people say that's nothing. I'm not sure about that. Thatcher, for example, was very opposed to sanctions in South Africa for the very good reason that they were working. And
And
she
it was
was,
British.
she, she was happy with the apartheid.
Jude, there was a guy on from Bloomberg on RT this morning, and he said if a couple of more sanctions are put in place, he says you could see very quickly the entire Russian economy collapsing. He says that would bring Putin to heel much quicker than he says maybe a long military conflict.
Yeah, I don't agree. Don't forget, Pat, what we're talking about here is boycott. Now, where does the word boycott come from? Captain boycott.
Boycott.
Captain boycott. And as far as I know, I may be wrong, but as far as I know, it worked.
Absolutely.
If you are absolutely boycotting.
If you look at it now, all the oil companies, Exxon are pulling out, BP are pulling out. Your man said this morning on RT, he says if they stop buying gas and energy and shut down the Nord Stream pipe 1, not pipe 2, he says Russia is in free fall.
Well, let's try it. Let's try it for a year. Okay, so we have to suffer. Fine. I'm quite prepared to suffer. I'd rather suffer that than suffer the possibility of nuclear warfare. The last person, incidentally, that I heard saying that NATO should get in there, get their warplanes on, was Edwin'S, a deeply religious Christian. I've got a phone call here, but I'll let it run. Yes, a deeply religious Christian who believes that that's what we should do. We should be standing up to them, send in NATO's planes, and if they clash over the Ukraine, well, that's the way it is. I mean, you have to stand up to bully, as he called them, have to stand up to a bully.
But you know something, I can understand. Don't totally disagree with Putin on that one. Jude, there's something, it's not, but hold on, Jude. There's something, but Jude, that's almost like we're the cowards. Jude, look what's happening to the Ukrainians. They're a democracy. These guys come in and you know, because of they want to. I think Putin has some idea that he wants to restore Russia's grandeur to 70 years ago or whatever. And Jude, like they didn't. There was a lady on. I've been listening. I must stop listening to it. By the way, she said Kiev was like Paris. She said we had a lovely life. We had 3 kids. She's the last thing we expected was Russians to be, and she's our home is gone. She's our hospitals are gone. Our schools are gone. Jude, that's the Russians. It's not the Ukrainians who are at fault of this. Ukrainians are quite entitled to vote as they see fit.
I agree completely with that, Pat. I completely agree with that. But I don't think there's any point in saying we should be brave and stand up to them. If what you're saying is we should be brave and stand up to their nuclear weapons. That's the part that really...
But it's not often I agree with Bolton, but he said yesterday, right, see when they get in the next place, and he says, by the way, back off or we'll use nuclear weapons. He says, do we stand up then? Do he goes to Moldova, you know, and it says the same? Does he go to Latvia? Do we say the same? You know,
don't forget that you had the whole USSR for many years and a Cold War.
Yeah.
And it wasn't military action that brought an end to the USSR. It was the economy that fell apart because they couldn't afford to keep...
By the way, there was no sanctions in Russia back then.
No, that's right. Yeah, well, fair enough. But my point is that USSR was not defeated by war. It was defeated by the economy. Internal economy just fell apart because of the weight that was being put on it. So I give it. I'd rather have a year of trying with this.
Right. Anyway, I'll leave you this. I sort of agree with you too, Jude, because I sort of, when I was listening to Butch, I said I can't disagree. But here's the point. Earlier on today, Putin issued a statement warning not to escalate sanctions any further. He says it was, you know, what did I write? Don't escalate tensions. And there are several people are saying that already the tensions from sanctions are really causing massive concern within Russia. And there's there's shortages already. And they're saying that, you know, a lot of they import so much foodstuff that, you know, if it doesn't get through. By the way, Jude, wasn't there a boat came in yesterday to dock in Derry? They can't. Most of European countries won't allow them to dock. So, Jude, if you can't sell your oil and your gas, and you can't get your food in, and you can't get, and apparently they're already having problems, spares for planes and stuff because those stuff that was in order isn't getting through. All that, as you rightly point out, that must have an effect.
And don't forget, I've been looking at the 70s on Sky TV documentaries from about the 70s, and the Vietnam War ended not because America did better or whatever, because Americans at home said, no, this is enough. We don't want this. We don't want this. Now, it wasn't that they had an alternative military strategy or anything else like that. So just get our boys home. They're being killed. Stop doing it. And it worked. Now, if you got things to the point where the Russians were saying to Putin, we don't want many more body bags coming back. We don't want to be going and not having, any produce on the shelves. Our lives are hard to a point where we can hardly live. I think, Putin would be whistling a different tune at that stage. Give sanctions a try and make them for real. And let's see what happens. Some people were saying you shouldn't have the boycott, the Bolshoi Ballet shouldn't be affected by that. I would say affect every single thing Russian. Even people who may be, decent Russians who are anti-Putin even. I think they should have just a blanket ban on all things.
And
let's see what happens.
As long as Russia is doing this, bang.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I suppose we better move on.
Okay. And this is the last one, I think. No, well, there's two, very quickly two. One. Labour, you've pointed out, has a new leader. And I think it's the third new leader in say how long?
Very short.
5 years, maybe?
5 years.
And the question is, I couldn't believe it because Alan Kelly is locally known as AK-47.
47.
And you remember the time he was elected and he was shown being thrown up in the air and he was, oh my God, he was a personification of, aggression and toughness. And then for the next year or two, he's been very quiet and speaking in the Dáil and saying, Taoiseach has done this and so. I don't know what was going on there. And then when he was taken out by his own party, he went so quietly, and he kept talking about them as lads together. The lads here have decided
that I should go.
What do you think? Is it good or bad?
I don't know. I think the Labour Party are almost someone ridiculous. They're at one stage under Dick Spring. I think they had 32 or something like that. Someone around that. TDs. They were on the rise, and everybody thought these are the guys that are going to steal the clothes of Fianna Fáil and all the rest of it. They were liberal, they were attractive, they were all the rest of it. And Jude, they imploded. One of the big things, Jude, that I really genuinely think during the water charges thing over here, instead of taking the side of the working people, the ordinary people, they totally supported the government's stand. And basically, they just lost the working people. What they really did was stood up for the bosses. The policy that was being introduced by the two main parties was we're not going to tax the big companies. We're not going to tax the rich. We're going to bring in a universal social charge. Dude, if you're earning 100,000 a year, 7% won't mean if you're earning £100 a week, losing £7 a week is a hell of a big difference. Right. So it was totally disproportionate. And of course, then when what was it, Microsoft or someone in the middle of it all, the European court ruled that they owed Ireland 13 billion.
Apple.
The Irish government, was it Apple? You can never remember. I always get confused. The Irish government helped Apple won their case. And I think a lot of people and Labour were up to their eyeballs on it. And you sort of go, Labour just lost its way. And Jude, I think that the water charges, Jude, I think they crossed the Rubicon over into.
I completely agree. And you remember that famous scene when their leader, I've forgotten her name now, was marooned in her car. Oh
God, she was the minister for what do you call her? Joan Burton.
John Burton, very good. Anyway, they have lost it. I would come back to the same thing I was talking about earlier. That Labour, unlike in the case of James Connolly, the Labour man, they don't have any position on the constitutional question at all, as far as I know. I've never heard any Labour man speaking about the border or about conditions in the north.
The thing about Labour, the minute Labour got into power, they became far more right wing than Fine Gael.
That's right. And anyway, there's something of an irrelevance because they say we do the bread and butter thing. Well, you know, the people before profit to the bread and butter thing. Social Democrats do the bread and butter thing. Sinn Féin does the bread and butter thing. There isn't room for Labour with their stained reputation to come in and say, well, we're very concerned for the people. No chance, no chance. Sorry, Alan. I hope you enjoy. He said he would have found more time to spend with his family.
Yeah. Does
he realise the irony of that?
Eamon Gilmore was the leader, I think, during the water charges, and he was caught saying off the record that he totally supported the charges. So, like,
always treat every microphone as a live microphone until otherwise proven. Okay, Pat.
Yeah. All the best.
I think we've filled a lot of them. Okay.
Yeah.
And everybody should go and watch that really, really, really good video podcast we did with Chris Donnelly. Right? Right or wrong?
Richard.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's plenty of stuff there for all the nerds to get their words into, or their hands in.
Okay, Pat. Bye.
Hey, look, Jude.